slowed down. So I'm very happy to finally, after about 30 years, have another program on moths for CNPS Marin, high time. And our speakers are Allen Fish and Catherine Chang. We can call her Cat. More than 3,700 species of Lepidoptera California home, and more than 90% of these are moths. Often overlooked and maligned, moths are essential native plant pollinators and a critical food source for songbirds and bats. They also have a dizzying range of sizes and shapes and boast color patterns and schemes that would knock the socks off any clothes designer. Cat, Chang, and Allen Fish will introduce how enjoyable it has been to learn about moths and how easy it is once you have your moth goggles to find and attract them. We will highlight the close ecological relationships between moth species and their larval host plants, demonstrating how host specificity is important for understanding moth biology, identification, and conservation. Some of the species we will highlight will include recent summer sightings, along with moths we can expect to see in the fall. So Allen is Director Emeritus of the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory with a number of papers that he's published in the Journal of Raptor Research. And in the bio on our website, there are links to some of those publications. And Kat is an adjunct professor at the University of San Francisco Architecture Program, principal at Madrone Design Studio in private practice, where she designs buildings, streetscapes, and landscapes, fostering vibrant pedestrian-scaled communities and creating regenerative, ecological, agricultural, and cultural relationships within cities. Kat also teaches in the architecture program at the University of San Francisco and serves on the board of iNaturalist.org. On weekends, you can find her enjoying the day. It says here, flying moths that are flying, but I think you mean finding moths that are flying. Anyway, welcome to both Kat and Allen. And Allen will speak first.
Actually, Kat, do you want to say anything before I start into the slides?
Well, I don't know. We could even talk a little bit about how we met each other, and how that sort of interaction has led to supporting both of our interests in Lepidoptera. Before we move into slides, if people really are interested in that. I myself noticed that there was this amazing person who I had no idea who it was posting all these incredible moths in the Berkeley Hills on iNaturalist. And I got really interested in seeing that, mostly because Dr. Jerry Powell, who was passed away a couple of years ago, he was an entomologist professor at UC Berkeley. He had done exactly the same thing for many decades, actually, where he was looking at what was flying every single night at his Berkeley residence. And though that data is being held at the Essig Museum on the UC Berkeley campus. So it was really exciting to see that Allen stepped into that place, because there was a vacuum after Jerry Powell passed away. So, and Jerry Powell is part of the reason why I got interested in moths in particular, mostly because I was the designated driver for him as he aged. Some folks like to say a yellow line was just a suggestion to him on the road. So everybody in the Lepidoptera community was like, we need to get you a driver. And it turned out to be me. So sort of through osmosis, I began to pick up more and more information about Lepidoptera. And a part of the reason why I was asked on those two is because I do have a background in understanding our California native plants. And so the Lepidopterists were like, come with us, we need your help. So it all kind of came together in a nice way. So that's how I met Allen.
That's great. I didn't know all that, so appreciate knowing that too. I'm going to talk a little bit about my trip from hawks to I say hawk moths in the slides, but I'll just say that I I very carefully avoided iNaturalist. I'm sorry, Kat, for many years because I was swimming in data down there at Fort Cronkite working on raptors. I don't eBird either, and the citizen science, community science that I was involved with was very hands-on and very personal, and these people doing far big data iNaturalist work, I just didn't quite know where to plug in, but as I kind of muddled my way from butterflies to dragonflies to moths, Kat was one of the first people to start showing up to tell me that I got that species right. Oh, and I didn't get that one right, but here's a help, and started giving me some free professional advice on my moth mistakes. And one of the moth goggle, I would say, criteria is that you're willing to make mistakes. And as opposed to my bird watching community, the birding community, you don't get everything to species sometimes, and that's a horrible ego kick in the butt because it feels like a failure if you don't get something to species. My friend, the bee biologist Sarah Leon Guerrero, once said to me, "Don't expect to get things to species," and that was a great epiphany for approaching moths with humility and I'll touch a little more on that. But I was thrilled one day when down on 4th Street at a craft fair in Berkeley, a friend of mine who's a butterfly moth aficionado, um, Megan Niekow, with her husband Paul Johnson, who runs a lot of the state butterfly atlas work, um, uh, pulled Cat Chang on her bicycle over to meet me, and boy, we've just been gossiping and talking moths ever since. And Kat's been an incredible mentor for me to know personally and ask the questions that keep me up at night and things like that. So mentorship is really important in this work, and I'm very much the stumbling student and thrilled to have a wonderful community, people like Liam O'Brien and Paul Johnson and a variety of butterfly and moth professionals to learn from. So yeah, that's kind of my intro. So why don't I jump into slides and I'll take you a little more on that hawk to hawk moth journey. Um, and then we'll kind of share our bits and pieces here. So uh, be patient. Oop, I got there too early. I'm going to back you up. There we are. So there's the opening, putting on moth goggles. Some of you may have read the Bay Nature article that we worked on together. It's actually, I think, 5 articles. I don't know how we got away with that, Kat, but that was a lot of fun. We had a great time last year working with Victoria Schlesinger, who's the incredible editor of Bay Nature magazine. If you don't subscribe, um, please do, because magazines deserve our love and attention right now. And the idea of putting on moth goggles really evolved while we were working together. And exactly what moth goggles are, we kind of address here, but I think at some point we should do something that makes it clear about what moth goggles are and how much they cost on Amazon and things like that. So we'll work on that together. So for the last 40 years, it's shocking to me to say that. And I know I've crossed paths with many of you. I got to scan the list, and it's great to see some names that I haven't talked to people in a while. I was the director of the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory. The GGRO was a Parks Conservancy and National Park Service partnership that was set up in order to monitor the fall migration of raptors over the Marin Headlands, biggest migration of its kind in the Western United States, an incredible opportunity to keep a pulse on populations. And I'm going to come back to that idea pretty quickly here. And there's an American kestrel flying behind the counters. And one of the key things we were doing up there is collecting data using community science. And of course, in 1985, community science actually hadn't been coined as a word. Um, we were all kind of barely stumbling through our early personal computer databases. DBase 4 Plus was my expertise. Boy, that disappeared really quick. But it was exciting to be able to collect data over a long period of time. And honestly, I had the greatest job in the world. I got paid to collect data on wild things that was a critical data set to amass. And I got addicted to the idea of the communities of people can be brought forward to collect data without being professionals if they're managed well, taught well, their data are evaluated. And the Park Service, the national parks were perfect locations for this. You might notice here the kestrel data from 1993 to 2017 is a kind of sad decline. Kestrels are one of the birds, the raptors, that's of most concern of the 19 hawks, eagles, falcons, vultures, kites that we studied. And interestingly, no one's really figured out nationally why kestrels are disappearing so quickly, but it's happening in most parts of the United States. One of my hypotheses, and I think it's a pretty good one, is that kestrels, being very insectivorous, are actually being or have actually lost a huge amount of their prey base because of the loss of especially large insects, orthopterans, but beetles and probably some Lepidoptera as well. So it's an interesting tie-in for me, and it was one of the things that got me thinking about being a monitor of insects, not a monitor of not just a monitor of birds. Just to leave you on a positive idea, I'm not going to go through all the 19, but the peregrine falcon recovery was clearly, we were able to map it out. And it's one of the things that corroborated for me that the hawk migration counts were actually an effective data set for capturing statewide and national data, because we knew peregrine falcons did recover from DDT pretty quickly in the 70s and 80s. Once the management and DDT was removed and everything kind of went forward. Interestingly, we're at an odd place now in the life of the peregrine falcon populations. In the Greater Bay Area right now, we're at about 30% of nesting compared to 5 years ago. The peregrine falcon is probably being hammered by avian influenza, and that's another talk that we could do sometime, but there's people who know a lot more about it than I do. Also looking at phenology, phenology meaning the dates of things. What are the dates that certain birds come through? And I like this osprey chart because the osprey peak early in migration. They're one of the first birds whose most of the birds fly through before we hit the middle of October. And you could really see the arc and pattern of that. Studying phenology, of course, is a direct response for ecologists to study climate change impacts. And a bird like an osprey that's relying on fish, that eat invertebrates in the ocean and rely on temperatures. There's so many different levels that could be altered and changed by climate change. So the idea of studying phenology in a lower trophic level, not lower value, but lower trophic level group like the moths was inspiring to me. Kristen noted the number, about 3,700 species of Lepidoptera in California. I wanted to kind of expand out on that just a little bit, because this is one of the things that fascinates me about moths. Notice up at the top, you've got, and these are rough data all from my naturalist, that we've got about 1,300 moth species in the Bay Area, about a 10% or 10 to 1 compared to the butterfly species. In the state of California, you can see the data here. You don't need me to tell you, but roughly look at this as a 10 to 1, roughly 10 to 1, bouncing around a little bit, moths to butterflies. Now I'm going to jump out a little bit. That's, by the way, one of my favorites, the Edwards glassy wing. Sometime look up the lepidopterist from San Francisco, Edward, from the 1800s, fascinating guy. Like Liam O'Brien, he was a lepidopterist and an actor, a stage actor. So really interesting story. I want you to focus on the United States one. And first of all, I'll mention that we have about 1,400 bird species in the United States, compared to 10,000 moth species. So imagine you were carrying your Sibley guide for your moths in North America. You'd have to carry seven Sibley guides in order to cover that amount. And I'm really getting at the amount of moth species. And of course, we know not all of them. We have a lot of moth species still to be learned, a lot of species that we don't know exact relationships. So there's a lot of work still to be done in moths. And that open of work, I always kind of wished I was around in the Darwin era, but seeing the opening of work to be done is something that really excites me about moths. There's a lot of studying, a lot of detective stories, a lot of ecological stories that about how moths relate to host plants, etc. I'm going to stay on this idea just to show you this list. This is the U.S. endangered species list from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's 3 moth species that are listed as threatened or endangered at the federal level as of this week. The percentages for butterflies and moths show us this, that 4.5% of butterflies are listed as endangered. That seems like a reasonable number. 0.03%, 3 out of 1,000. 3 out of 1,000, 3 out of 1,000, right? 10,000. No, wait, 1,000. 10,000, 10,000. It's an incredible lack of moths. We really haven't paid attention to moths, and they really seem to be understudied, underappreciated, undervalued. It's a really huge numerical gap, and this is true for California endangered species as well as federal. So why are there fewer endangered moths than endangered butterflies? I'm kind of, if we had a chance to do a group discussion about it, this is where I would break away and love to have some patter on this. But here are some things that jumped up for me. The diurnal nocturnal thing is real, and Kat's going to talk about some day flying moths, which was a huge realization for me working with Kat for the last 2 years, that there were day flying moths, and they're some of the most incredible and exceptional and host plant oriented. So that's neat. Moths have terrible publicists. They just have bad PR everywhere you look. It's kind of interesting. Studying raptors all those years, I paid close attention to the caricatures of raptors and the folklore about raptors and the attitudes about owls and hawks and vultures. And it's pretty interesting how far we get afield of the biology of some of these species. Moths have terrible folklore and terrible publicity, and it really is a place. There's the wool fiber problem. Cashmere sweaters are beautiful things. I've lost a few to moths in my house, but there are really very few moth species in the United States and California that are causing that problem. So, but it does sort of set us up with a little bit of anger to begin with. But what are the ecosystem service that moths provide? Why should we love moths? Why should they be special? Why should we treat them as if they're something as beautiful and lovely as butterflies? And of course, it's because they are. So I'm going to just go through a few things. At the very top there, moths are a really critical food source for many, many songbirds, for bats, nighthawks, small birds, but large birds too. I've been to several talks in the last year where somebody has said Sierra Nevada red fox, endangered species, eats a ton of moth larvae at different times of the year. They're a really critical source. Think about whales and krill, and big animals sometimes need large amounts of small animals in order to survive certain times. Bears, grizzly bears and black bears eat moth larvae and have moth larva sources of food that are really important, especially in high mountain areas. Then, of course, important pollinators. Moths are one of the most important pollinating groups that we have among the insects, and a lot of really incredible, unique moth plant species associations. Probably the most famous is the yucca moth, and the yucca that needs a certain species of moth in order to be pollinated. There are hundreds of stories like that that need to be told and talked about and discussed more. And then as you move into sort of the moth reading, and there's a lot of really incredible ecological roles and behaviors that just are kind of knock your socks off, beautiful and interesting things. There's underwater moths. There's moths that are larval form underwater and actually pupate underwater, and the adult climbs out of a stream. We have these in California. There's a whole group of underwater moths. There, and it's kind of interesting because moths, the closest bug, the closest insect to a moth is actually caddisflies. And of course, that's a caddisfly thing. So it makes sense that we might have underwater moths. Sloths have several moths that are unique species that live their entire lives on the fur of sloths. Kat told me today that each one of these could be its own long lecture or series of lectures. And I don't mean to take too much time other than to just sort of show you the beauty and fascination and ecological intricacy of moths. The furriness that we see on a lot of moths is actually effective at confusing bat sonar. And there's one group of moths, the tiger moths, that actually emit a sound in order to upset the sonar while they're flying. They've evolved a kind of countermeasure that keeps bats from being able to effectively know where they are. Moths can follow pheromones for miles, and this is a whole area that I've studied very little about, but the moth pheromone thing is really incredible, and it makes you realize that there's so much going on in the air that we don't know about. Chemical defenses that moths have. Many larval forms do, armyworms, things like that. And then wintering moths often have an antifreeze in their body chemistry that allows them to survive winter. And of course, the most important thing, the whole story of silk and the whole beauty of silk and the 5 to 7,000 years that we've been harvesting silk. We haven't. It's been done in China, but many countries have also separately evolved silk harvesting from moths, and really almost one of the first agricultural experiences was moth silk. There's, by the way, a wonderful new book out the last few years simply called Silk that tracks the 24 or so sources of silk from different animals in the wild and the way they've been used. It's a fascinating book and worthy of your time. So I'm going to jump into a real quick review of the moth lighting that I've been doing. You're looking at the porch on I have a tiny little porch in the Berkeley Hills. Got some local garden plants and trying to put more salvia in. I'm lucky we have 3 buckeye trees in the neighbor's yard next door. But really using this as my mainstay place has been exciting to see what kind of moths show up, when they show up, what their phenology is, what their year-to-year trends are. Are they population trends? Hard to tell with moths. You really have to review what you're seeing with lots of people and over lots of time. And also based on where you might trap moths, what the host and food plant connections might be. I know I'm getting some buckeye moths. I know I'm getting some coyote mint moths because those are the plants that we have around. But it's very difficult to figure out what moth species is connected with what food plant. That's a little black light, and Kat's going to show a picture close up of some of the lights that we both use. But everything's plugged in there, you can see, and that's a shower curtain, nothing fancy. This is very accessible stuff. This is a moth sheet that I put up 2 Junes ago, and just a nice spread of moths. You can see some of the diversity of shapes. We're not going to get much into the overview of different moth families, but moth families are fascinating, and a great way to kind of enter the world is to memorize 2 moth families, the noctuids, which are the straighter moths, like that dark one under the wasp in the left side. And then the one directly in the middle is a Geometridae. That's a more horizontal moth. Just seeing those 2 differences is a great start in moth world. So I thought this would let me jump forward. Next slide. There we go. I had many setbacks 2 years ago when I started doing the moth lighting. And the first one was I got a husky, a beautiful 6-year-old husky who it turned out loved to eat moths off the sheet. So that became an issue. And actually she learned not to do it and to stand back, but she still really wants to eat the moths. Even the little bitty ones she thinks are pretty great. The other thing I ran into is is kind of ironic. I spent years telling people that Cooper's hawks were wonderful, fascinating birds that needed to be loved for themselves. And people would look at me like they kill my chickadees and my titmice and my house finches and that whole raptor negative thing. And boy, I'll tell you, the day I came out to the sheet one morning and there was a cute little plain titmouse, oak titmouse, that was plucking moths off my sheet, just blew me away. Gosh, I called it plain titmouse. That's the old name. Sorry about that. And they were big moths. These little titmice were eating big moths, and I was furious. I threw things and I shouted and I yelled at it, and I hated titmice for about 3 days. It took me to get over my issues with titmice and realize they were just enjoying the buffet table that I left out for them. And that the raptor, being a raptor biologist, I should have been able to get through that one more easily. So I'm going to talk about some different species real quick, and then hand it off to Kat. And the emphasis for this is to really talk about some of the host plant relationships. So white-lined sphinx are kind of a cool startup moth for a lot of people because we have kind of boom and bust years in California. And 2023, the year I was starting moth work, was an absolute boom year. And a lot of friends were telling me about this huge hummingbird-sized moth that they were seeing in their salvias, in their mints, and around their gardens from the coast of California to the High Sierra. And it was a really exciting year for the whole state, as near as I could tell. Interestingly, I found that was corroborated in iNaturalist. You can see that's the historical data for just sphinx moths for the last 10 years, and the 2023 numbers were easily higher than any other year. So very cool moth to kind of figure out and get a sense of, and really a beautiful startup moth for exciting people who aren't quite sure that insects are their thing. I want to mention another trapping system that I use a lot, which is a moth trap or bucket. And there's nothing fancy about this. 5-gallon bucket, throw eight egg cartons in there, put a lid on it that allows you to stick a funnel on it, and then put a UV light, a black light over the top. And this is what it looks like when I'm operating it. Excuse me. And the beauty of the bucket is you don't have to get up in the morning and get mad at the titmice because the titmice can't get in the bucket. The bucket just collects like a collecting trap. It just collects up the moths that happen to be around and go into the funnel. They can't get out once they get in. And you can have a nice morning then taking your eggshell cartons out. This was a particularly wonderful day where I got actually about 14 ornate tiger moths. Usually it's one here, one there, or maybe 5 in the bucket. To get more than 10 in the bucket is pretty exciting, and to get 12 ornate tiger moths was very, very exciting. But the bucket thing is kind of nice because you can leave it alone, go out the next morning, and then see what Santa, the Santa of moths brought you. I'm going to show you just a few more species that if you do decide to stick a sheet out on the wall and get a black light, which can be very cheap, you can get one for less than $10. You probably have one at your house. These are some of the species in the Bay Area that are showing up right now and for the next month. And I put in yellow the host names. If the host is known for many of these species, we don't know what the host plants are. Brio brio for moth, limnia is apparently means something like maiden. So this is considered to be the green moth maiden. One of my favorites, just beautiful, beautiful greens, fading into kind of gray green. There's a lot of meshes of colors in different moths. Sometimes purples and browns hold hands in ways that you never imagined, sort of like for the birders, the violet green swallow. There's a variety of really interesting birds and mammals and plants and moths that don't follow the color structures that we're used to. This is, I think, one of Kat's favorites and mine too, because it looks like a piece of a banana peel. The Neoterpes edwardsata, also named for Edwards, the Lepidopterist from San Francisco. Very much a poppy specialist, and some really interesting work on how they were figured out as being specialists in poppies that are easily found in the literature. I love the picture over on the right of the larval form. I'm not going to show you many caterpillars because that's a whole nother area. But the range of colors is really interesting. So within a moth, you can see that you might get rich yellows, and you might get very faded, soft, more like canary white yellow colors. Part of this is time of year and fading. Part of this is just some of the phenotypes are different than others. So the looks can be very different. One of the most interesting moths to me is one that I didn't know was a moth. I've seen this bug for years. They're called plume moths. And plume moths, instead of spreading their wings out, they spread their wings out when they fly, and when they rest, they furl them up like a furled flag. It's kind of crazy, but they have a whole wing that's wrapped up inside that T on their bodies, and or on their wings, and they're very much focused on usually a family of plants. You can see here we've got a sage plume, a morning glory plume, and an artichoke plume. The artichoke plume is on any of the thistles. So these are very far-reaching, found around North America, around the world, really. And they're really fascinating little characters because they're just so different than anything else. One of the moths I've been seeing on my morning dog walks around Berkeley for the last week is this Genista broom moth. Genista being the genus for broom. And interestingly, the Eurysophida reversalis is originally a Mexican native that appeared in Los Angeles in 1930, the Bay Area by 1980, and seems to be building a life around lupins, acacias, brooms, also honeysuckles. So it's a specialist certainly in the pea family, but at the same time is expanding its range, probably due to gardens. It's pretty easy to imagine that, like, of course, many of the bugs and weeds that we know about. This is a really amazing little guy, and one of the really beautiful things about moth goggles is making your eyes small, learning to see things that aren't very big. This Dissimilomia metalliferalis, you can practice that too, is a specialist on eating the dried and desiccated seed pods from two species of lupins. It's found only along the California coast from Vancouver to Baja. It flies usually in the middle of the summer, and it's got the most gorgeous gold, red, shiny stuff on it. It's a tiny little moth, but it's got a little zebra stripe in the butt area. I'm going to just say that because I don't know my terminology for everything yet. And wonderful little black spots. So it's a really exquisite moth to see up close. It's also, as opposed to some of the moths that land and are very flat, it's very tent shaped. It's like a little pup tent. And I assume some of you are old enough, like me, to know what a pup tent is. So you really have to study it to see what its shape is. But it's a very charming little moth that really relies on old lupins, which is kind of exciting. One of the moths that many people know that I see a lot of, because there's a lot around the coast live oaks in Berkeley, are the California oak moth. And the moth is not exactly the most colorful. It's kind of a soft velvety brown, but the males have spectacular long feathery antenna for sensing pheromones. And I was lucky. My brother lives across town in Berkeley, and he called me up one day, said his coast live oak in his yard was being completely defoliated, and I needed to come right away. And this is an actual picture of the fence there, showing all these little larvae and all these little pupae of this particular species. People get pretty scared because it does devastate a tree, but the arborists I've talked to say the trees bounce back, and they're heavy dose years and not as heavy dose years. So it's, for me, a lovely moth to see in the evening when you've got a kind of light cloud of mothery around the coast live oaks around town, and they seem to do fine. Um, there's a pair of mating California oak moths, and you can tell the female because she has straight antenna. She doesn't have the feathers because he's sensing her pheromones, so he's out to find her. And that's it for me. Sorry to take so much time, and I'm gonna stop sharing right there and hand it off to my partner, mentor, Kat, and let her take the next stretch on day flying moths.
Okay, so guys, let's see here. Let's get this started. Thanks, Alan. That was great. Actually, I always love seeing all of those different species. So I'm taking a slightly different tack. What I wanted to focus on was actually moths that you can see more often in the springtime. And that's because I have some homework for all of you guys. When you're out on the trails and enjoying our spring wildflowers. So these moths don't take specialized equipment to lure them in. It's just having those moth goggles, like we mentioned, just they are small. The moth on the left is on Nemophila that you're seeing right there. And that's a pretty small flower. So this is not a very large moth, but you'll probably notice it because it's flying around. And these plants that you're seeing in this slide tend to be in more sort of shady, dappled shade areas. The water content in the atmosphere tends to be pretty high. And you often find these in the understory of like bay laurel and oak woodlands. So if you find yourselves on a trail like that, keep your eyes open, particularly in March and May through May. The one on the left, the Anaphila diva, also called the white Anaphila, its host is miner's lettuce, which is one of our earlier sort of annuals that come up. So it's one of our first moths that we start to see day flying in the spring. This one's pretty widespread. And I'm focused on moths in Marin County for this talk, but this is one that you will see all over the Bay Area because it is pretty numerous, actually. So as you're enjoying these and watching these little sort of black and white moths sit on mostly white flowers, from time to time, you might see an orange flash go by, and it's its sister species. And I did not know it was called the orange flash moth until today. And I apologize a little bit. Sometimes some of these moths I'm focused on that on their scientific names so that I can have a filing system in my brain and be able to pull up some of their associations and relationships that they have. So it's always kind of fun to learn that my understanding of this moth is exactly its common name, that you see this flash of orange kind of speed through your peripheral vision. This one, they're not totally sure what the host is. This could be Diplicus, it might be Arianthropy. It's a little bit up in the air. And like Alan said, there's some mysteries, lots of mysteries to be solved within Lepidoptera. So if we have any young people who, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be ageist, maybe our older cohort that's with us today might want to change careers and dive headlong into Lepidoptera. I'll be right there with you. How's that? And this is seen in Marin County. And I noticed the INAT records were mostly sort of around Mount Tam. So all the watershed lands that are kind of surrounding it is probably your best area to find it in the spring. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is out further in other locations in Marin County that just hasn't been reported yet. And you can see this one is sitting on miner's lettuce or Claytonia. But here's my homework for you guys. Be on the lookout for these two species. Both of them have unknown hosts, but they have been collected in Marin County. So there are records for them. They just haven't been seen recently. And we certainly don't have any iNaturalist records for them for either of these two species. And the one on the right Anopheles superba, I was going through all the Galbraith Wildland Preserve INAT records, just all of them, because I've been sort of assisting and helping the folks that are participants, who are often at that particular preserve, just sort of catalog what they're seeing at in their area. And this one came up. It had been labeled Anopheles, but you can see how different it is. It doesn't have any sort of striping in this area. And I was kind of excited that it potentially could be something else. And I called in Paul Johnson, who has spent a lot of time looking at this particular genus, and we decided it was this. So it was the first INAT record. And so they're out there. So you guys could also probably participate in a very similar way if you're interested. Chaparral is probably where you're going to see one of them. And then the other one, Galbraith Wildlands Preserve, is a mixture of redwoods and oak woodland. So this is sort of a fun sort of diptych of this particular moth. So on the right is its adult form. And I was hiking with my husband. This was up in, I want to say Morgan Territory, but actually it was Los Vaqueros Reservoir was what we were on. And we saw this beautiful, it looked like a butterfly going from salvia to salvia. And it would start at the bottom of the spire and then move up the flowering spike. And I like this photo because it sort of, this moth gets to the top of it and he looks a little bemused, like, what should I move on to the next one maybe? And my husband thought that it was a butterfly. And I said, actually, look at it really carefully. It's a day flying moth. And so that was kind of a sort of novel idea to him, actually. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was at the Point Reyes butterfly count. And some of you guys might be able to recognize the host plant for this darker spotted straw moth. It's sitting on Grandella stricta out at Abbott's Lagoon, and it was just sitting in the middle of the flower, just munching away, having a good time. It's probably a generalist. That means that it might enjoy many different kinds of host plants. We're not totally sure exactly, does it have a preferred one, or is it just kind of just happy to be on any kind of a plant? It's a good question. So the records for sightings for this in Marin County is mostly West Marin, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's kind of all throughout Marin County, because it's, being a generalist, it could be really seen almost anywhere. This is one of my favorite moths to see in the spring. I think one of the excitements of the Sphinx moths is often just how large they are. And they often, just the way they fly with their wings moving so fast, they act almost like a hummingbird. And so with the white-lined Sphinx moth that Alan talked about, this is its, cousin in some ways. It's not that closely related, but it has the same general form and it flies in a similar way. And but this one is much smaller than the white-lined Sphinx moths. But if you're in the spring, if you see something that almost looks like a bumblebee, but it's a little larger and it's got a flash of orange, it's probably Clark's Sphinx. And its host is Clarkia. So, and I saw this one up on Pine Mountain Fire Road, and I had a good time watching it. And this is flies between March and June. Okay, some more homework for you guys. I really love the Grayas. They host on Lithophragma, or also called woodland stars. And you may have seen one actually, because they sort of sit on the flower very patiently. You could probably even like move the flower spike around, and I'd be surprised if they even move off of it. They're just 100% interested in nectaring and not particularly that interested in flying away. So next spring, when you're enjoying this woodland stars, when they come, pay extra attention to see if you notice these very kind of quiet looking, they don't do very much. They just sit, and they're not particularly highly marked. But getting more records of these would be fantastic to have, so that we could really understand its distribution across California. Now, some of the sister species have more markings. And so if you get a little bit further away from Marin County and you're looking at a woodland star and you see a moth that's got some really fun chevrons or stripes, they're still grayas, actually. They're just maybe slightly flashier. So it seems to be the records that we see in iNaturalist seem to be centered around Mount Tam, and again, early to late spring. And this is what also another one that just sits on top of flower spikes, but this one is on fringe pod or Thyssanocarpus, which is in the broccoli family, mustard family, however you want to sort of look at that. These are really tiny. If any of you guys have really spent time looking at fringe pod, you know that the flowers are very short-lived. The petals fall off pretty quickly, and the pod starts to grow. The fruit of this starts to grow fairly fast, but you can see how tiny this moth is. And so it's often overlooked because it is so small, but it'll just sit on top of these spikes nectaring from the Thyssanocarpus flowers. And I was saying to Alan earlier today that this is actually a female, and it's not because of the shape of the antenna here. It is because the head is covered with little orange scales. And this particular moth species belongs to the Adelids, so it's slightly larger family, which does include the Couchus genus. And I'm about to move over into the Adelas for you guys in a second, but this would be one to get. It'd be great to have more records of this in Marin County. And it's related to the Adelas, which are also known as the fairy moths, and they are some of my favorite moths, actually. So this one's on owl clover. So most of the Adelas are pretty closely related to their host plants. And so if you see them on the plant, it's usually their host that they're on. And then Jerry Powell, who I talked about earlier when we began our talk this evening, he wrote an entire sort of this amazing book all on the moths of Western North America. And his little section on this moth, I just love how you can see how grumpy he was getting about taxon change from Orthocarpus to Castanea. And so he had to just like get that in there, that the moths really don't care about taxon change. They're just going to continue to use their host plants here. And I love that the second binomial for this means little flame. And so when if you're out and seeing this moth, it catches the light exactly like a little flame. And so that's pretty fantastic. Ring Mountain is a great place to see this. Giacomini Open Space Preserve. Yeah. And then some more of the fairy moth family here, some more Adelas. And this one, you can really, the Adela cingulella, which hosts on Gilia, has more of the like fantastic antenna that are so long. And when these things try to fly, the antenna really drag them down. So they kind of fly in these funny little sort of hopping moves. And it's mostly because they're getting dragged down by these fantastic antennae. And so both of the ones on the left sitting on this gilia are male here. And that has to do with the fact that their antennae are so long. And also that their heads here are not orange. They have black scales instead. So it's kind of interesting to sort of know the natural history of these animals that you can tell by these minute differences. And including with the minute differences, like I mean, it's definitely like a rabbit hole that I went down into to like learn more about these particular moths. But the one on the right is one that we could use a lot more sightings to understand its distribution in the Bay Area. This is Adela plurella, and it's considered threatened according to the sort of state of California. And there has been some talk about making this on the endangered species list. So this would be one that if you guys are out there in the spring enjoying cream cups, that's its host. And the way you can tell that it is this particular species is those head scales around its head. This one it looks like it has bed head. It's all mussed up. And so it's got that kind of sort of really fluffy look to its head scales. And you can see the person who's holding this. This is LJ Moore McClellan, her photograph, holding the cream cup. And as you guys know, cream cups aren't necessarily that large. So this is also a pretty small moth here. But that would be exciting. And if you guys do post these on iNaturalist, please feel free. You can tag me at any point on your moths. If I don't know what it is, I'll try my best to help you get resources. So, those are the moths that I hope that you guys see next spring. And but jumping a little bit, here's mothing as a community science sort of thing. Mothing, whenever I'm out putting sheets up, or people have invited me to come and help them with a moth event, it's really interesting to see the number of people who just get absolutely fascinated with what they're seeing on the walls. And so on the left, it's the California Lichen Society meeting that I totally derailed. So all the people were like looking at all the moths that were left over from the night before. And that was in January, and it was pretty cold, and I'm surprised at how many moths showed up. And then on the right, this was at a Bay Nature party, and we got excited about the possibility of moths being called in at our host's porch light. And everybody was like, what is it? They wanted to learn. But Alan, didn't we decide it was just a leaf? So, and then this is a moth night at Skyline Gardens, which is my local chapter, which is the East Bay CMPS chapter, one of their initiatives, their restoration initiatives. And once in each summer, the stewards like to put on a moth light to thank all the volunteers that have spent their summer working on this particular trail. And so we have a good time. Usually it's about 40 to 50 people who show up. And we just like move from moth light to moth light, and we talk about what's showing up on the moth sheets and why that particular moth might be on the sheet, like what are its hosts. Just really kind of connecting the story of what people spent their summers working on, and then seeing those connections to the animals that also use the restoration plants. So how do you do, like when you're out there, one of the things I like about this is that the barrier to putting up moth sheets is pretty low. Your monetary investment doesn't have to be a lot of money. And you can see here, and not that this is advertising for Amazon, but I have to admit, Amazon does make it very easy to find these particular UV lights. And you can see you can get them for about like a 2-pack or a 4-pack. And it really only ends up, each one is only about $10. So it's not a lot. And then a sheet could just be an old sheet, so or old curtain of some sort. I know that Alan likes these, and the one on the upper right is I think a plug-in. It's probably more powerful than the ones I just showed, so it might bring in things from a little bit further away. So, but they take all forms and shapes, and you don't have to be married to any particular one. Then using your cell phone to do the photography is fantastic. And I believe Alan uses the ring light. I actually just use a flashlight, and it is an LED flashlight. So when I take a photograph, sometimes the pulsing, because it's polarizing, will show up as bands. And I've learned to just move your flashlight slightly so that you don't pick up those wavelengths with your camera, your cell phone camera. And then I like to use this macro clip-on. It's larger than the like 10x or 15x. This ends up being, I think, closer to like 7x. But the wide angle lens, you just screw off and you put it aside to a day that you want to do wide angle photography. But I only use this bottom part right here. And what's nice about that is you don't get distortion around the edges. You get a little bit slightly larger depth of field than you would on the really tiny macro clip-on lenses. So you don't even really have to put a lot of money into photography either for this. And then the last things, if you want to make it truly portable. So Damon Tai first started figuring out that these things were available through Amazon. And so he often will go hiking sort of on some of the Sierra trails and do backpacking. And he'll just take a battery pack and a white t-shirt, just a white t-shirt, and just a strip light. And it's light enough for him that he doesn't mind carrying it as his equipment. And then lastly, I have two last slides, and they're just really more about how to sort of connect in from what you're seeing, learning more about them. And Alan and I both use these two books in particular. And so the Moths of West, they're both named Moths of Western North America. And Seabrook Leckie, her book just came out just recently, and it's gorgeous. It's a great picture book. It's very much a field guide, so you can open it up and kind of scan through the pages and look for what what you may have seen. And then the one on the top is more of an academic sort of tome. It doesn't have a lot of photographs. It's harder to use as a field guide, but it has the natural history of the species to great depth. It's kind of amazing how much Powell and Oppler were able to put into this particular book. But both together are kind of a great combination. And then lastly, I think this is where most of my learning comes from. I definitely are using the books, but I'm also looking at at least these 4 websites. There's a few others, but we thought this was a good starting off point. First of all, I feel like, and I'm sorry, I'm totally biased in some ways because I am on the board of iNaturalist, but what I love about it is that you can post the moth, and somebody who's kind of connected to studying that, maybe that area of Lepidoptera, might start to slide in and offer helpful hints or give you more information of what you should be looking for. And so from that feedback, I feel is so necessary. The Bud Guide can also give that to as well. And sometimes when I'm not getting that much activity from iNaturalist, I'll cross post it on Bug Guide. And then there is the Pacific Northwest Moths and North American Moth Photographers Group are really great sources for learning about just going even deeper what's possible. So that pretty much is, I think, the kind of a nutshell. If you wanted to get started, this is a good toolkit right there. So thanks, you guys. I'm going to stop sharing. Let's see here. Let me get, there we go.
Oh, thank you both. That was terrific. We have some questions and thank yous in the chat. And let's see, Lisa Wolcott writes to Alan that she remembers seeing Eurysiphita reversalis larvae all over broom and silver lupin when she was doing mapping invasive removal in the headlands for Maria in the late 90s. She took some of her former co-workers at CAS entomology to identify. So cool, you pivoted to moths. I love bugs. That's from Lisa Wolcott, formerly Sebastian.
Thank you.
And Richard Simino is asking what email addresses to use to contact you to report a moth he can't ID. I don't know if you want to share that privately or just recommend posting on INAT.
I'm going to recommend posting on INAT, and I'm going to, so the best way to tag me is in the comments or somewhere. Just put at Cat Chang, and so I'm going to write that in here for everybody. So feel free to just tag me by using that name. And Alan, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I can put mine in.
And then I see that the next question is a particular wavelength of black light that's recommended. And the ones that you buy off Amazon or some similar type of online shopping experience, they are all at $3.95 for the most part. And that seems to work fine. The professional entomologist lights that you can get from some sort of scientific supply place, those are at $3.60. So they are more powerful. And technically, you might see slightly different species coming between the two different wavelengths. And that, I know that Damon Ty set up a tag on INAT. So if you are seeing things at $3.95, he's asking you to go ahead and tag it that you saw it using that kind of light versus a 360 nanometer light. But the difference between the two is hundreds of dollars. So I am totally fine with keeping my kit to $3.95.
And Richard Chimino again mentioning that there's a California native monarch way station in Larkspur. So that's more a butterfly suggestion, but Niven Park Point Butterfly Garden. And there's a thank you, thank you. How common is the snowberry clearwing in Marin? Vernon Smith asks.
That is a great question. I just wrote about that particular moth in for a Bay Nature article that's going to come out next issue. I don't actually have an answer to that, but I bet we could call up INAT and see. That's actually a species I have yet to see.
Nice. More thank yous. Okay, if anyone wants to unmute and just verbally ask a question, by all means do so.
I just wanted to comment to Kat that I did take a picture of the snowberry clearwing in Marin, but it's not a very good picture. It was waving its wings too fast.
It was doing what it's meant to do, right?
Yeah, yeah.
If you feel comfortable, I would love for you to put that on iNat if you're up for that. Just
Okay, well, like I say, I wish it was a clear image, but it isn't.
okay, this is why it's so important. There are no records of it on iNat
Well,
for
I
the
mean,
Bay.
I'm assuming that I identified it correctly. If can I share my screen?
Oh, please. Oh, wait, I'll probably have to make you a co-host. Let me see if I can do that. Let me see here. Make a co-host. There we go. Okay, so Vernon, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay.
Oh, that looks like a bee moth.
Oh, that's a bee moth.
Is it?
Okay. Then I asked the wrong
think.
question. Sorry.
No, I think this is a moth.
Yeah, a
Could
bee
be
moth.
wrong.
But there are these day-flying moths that look like bees.
But that might be the
And
clear.
that might be it. It's certainly got clear wings.
Yeah. I would definitely suggest, Vernon, please put that up on iNat. I think there's enough information. It sure does look like a snowberry clearwing, and I would love to have other people say yes to that as well.
Okay.
But we're not. Why are we not? I am not seeing any records for our area.
This was along the the what's it called, the West Marine Fire Road, the one where Hoo Cooey Coo goes off.
Uh-huh.
It was on that fire road.
It's nectaring on Echium.
Yes, yeah. There's it's not the native plant, but while I'm at it, can you tell me what that one is?
Well, what the plant is?
No, this moth. Can you see it?
Well, it's definitely a clear wing. I'm just sort of
No, there's. I'm showing you another one.
Oh, I can't see
Oh,
it.
we can't see it.
Okay, well, let me stop the share and share again then. There.
Oh.
Alan, what do you think?
Looks like Lacinipolia.
Definitely in the noctuid family.
And an arches of some kind.
It's beautiful. That's a beautiful photograph.
And it's this is lichen here. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's important or not.
So Vernon, I wonder if yours is related to snowberry. I think it might be the Hemeris Detus, Rocky Mountain clearing, maybe. You might want to look at that.
I looked online and it said that it is in the Pacific Northwest, but it didn't I didn't explore it fully.
Take a look and see if that looks a little bit closer to what you had.
Okay.
But it's definitely a clear wing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a beautiful noctuid that you also had with the hiding with the lichens and the sterium mushroom that was there.
That was the brown shaggy one. Okay.
Yeah, you could say
Very
that.
nice. Okay, let's see. I think there were a few more questions in the chat. Just thank yous. And Jill Templeton says that she's seen Ceanothus silk moths up in Sonoma. Are they also in Marin? Yes, they are. What's the best time? What months would you say to see the adults? Oh, March to April. Very nice. I am guilty of, as a child, collecting one that laid eggs, and then I looked it up in my inadequate insect book at the time, which was one of those little golden nature guides, and I thought it was a Cecropia moth, and I tried to feed the larvae with members of the prunus family, so plums and cherry, and of course they all died. Terrible. Terrible thing. Okay. So I think that brings us to the end. So thank you both very, very much. I have one announcement. I got a text while I was introducing the speakers. You probably remember, well, I'm sure most of you remember Laura Lovett, who sadly passed away this spring, just a week after stewarding our spring plant sale through. And there is going to be a memorial for her. I don't know the venue yet, but you might want to save the date of September 13th from 2 to 4 p.m. And we'll publish more details as they're available in our e-newsletter. And thank you all very much, and hope to see you back in September. I don't have a speaker lined up yet, but I will scramble and try to get one in time. So wait a minute, 5 new messages, some more thank yous. Okay. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Night, night.